Russia is tired of the war, both morally and physically. The disposable orcs at the front, even the Z-War correspondents, have long been howling that the conquest campaign needs to end. Otherwise, the Russian world will be wiped out to zero against the Ukrainian defense.
In this situation, launching an offensive just means tens or hundreds of thousands of casualties. I think we've already lost about 700,000 people there. We can't fight like this. It's impossible to fight this way. So anyone who says fight to the end, no truce, such a person is a political criminal.
They tried so hard for 10 years to destroy Ukraine that in the end they ran out of Russians in Russia.
The number of native Russian men in Russia is getting smaller and smaller every year. The active part of the male population, yes, those passionate individuals who went to Donbass in 2014, and those who went even just for money, even for some kind of mythical Russian world, whatever the reason, they went there. And they are also Russian people, and they died there. So if, for example, tomorrow a war were to break out to the migrants against Russians, we would lose it.
All this time, the Kremlin has stubbornly pretended that everything is fine. Everything is going according to plan. The army is advancing, and victory is just around the corner. Russians will wash their boots in the English Channel. Thanks to the war, the economy is only growing and has already surpassed impoverished Germany.
We've surpassed Japan. Who would have thought, right?
I'll just give a round of applause.
But reality is a harsh thing, and even the most delusional Kremlin Führer can no longer deny it. In Moscow, they've realized that continuing the war will inevitably lead to catastrophe for Russia. The Russian Reich has already degraded to the level of war donkeys at the front and ration cards for the serfs. That's why the Kremlin has started actively preparing to wind down the so-called special military operation.
We are ready. We've always said this, and I want to emphasize it once again. We are ready for these negotiations. On the Ukrainian issue.
Putin, no longer hiding it, is talking about peace and trying to conduct behind-the-scenes talks with the US, so he can exit the war while saving face.
I know for a fact, from a number of sources in Moscow, that communications between Trump's team and Moscow, specifically with Putin and Lavrov, are ongoing and have been happening throughout these weeks. And negotiations are underway. There are certain kinds of bargaining going on.
While the Kremlin is begging for peace, the propaganda machine is preparing the fascist-leaning population for the end of the war.
And that's why today we need to understand that if Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin decides something, then we, as people who voted for Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, must accept that decision without any preconditions.
Yesterday, Kiev's former brothers all said the special military operation must stop now.
It's obvious that in a month or two, the special military operation will end and peace will come. A peace that, by the way, many people, to put it mildly, are dreading. They say almost the same words. We don't need any peace. What are you talking about? All those backroom deals and so on. Anyone who now says, oh, it's a backroom deal, oh, once again without us, it's clear that this is someone who's afraid of losing the trough they've grown accustomed to during the special military operation.
Not so long ago, those who went out with a sign saying for peace were considered traitors to the motherland. Now, the traitors are those who want to continue the special military operation. What fantastic metamorphoses. That's what the life-giving effect of the AFU does.
So there will be peace negotiations and peace, if that's even possible, as a compromise. They will never recognize either Zaporizhzhia or Kherson or Donetsk or Luhansk, never. So that means it will remain in some kind of suspended status. So our demand for their recognition, I think, doesn't look realistic right now. It's always a matter of compromise. Peace, let me emphasize again, when made by two sides, always involves both parties coming to an agreement, and it's always a compromise.
Now the same people who called for war until all Ukrainians were destroyed are shouting about ending the special military operation.
We need to show such determination that they understand that they understand that no matter what efforts are made, no matter what sacrifices, we will see this victory through to the end. We will win. If you don't want us to persuade you, we'll kill you.
A few moments later.
To keep pushing forward, to fight until the very end. That's definitely a bad idea. I'll try to explain why now. 3 years of exhausting war, for which we were unprepared, and enormous losses.
But 20 years of aggressive Nazi propaganda have not been in vain. Society has been pumped full of imperial chauvinism and hatred toward Ukraine. Even the last drunks from Syzran are demanding to take Odessa and Kharkiv. Z-Patriots started screaming about Kremlin betrayal, claiming it decided to make a backroom deal. They see any move toward peace as Russia's defeat and demand the bloodshed continue. They have, of course, labeled the official propaganda and Putin himself as enemies of the people, practically calling them CIA spies.
Today, I read was that Solovyov,
Gasparian, Yakimenko, Karnaukov, and Mardan have started warming up the narrative of Russia's betrayal.
There has been a serious split among Russian fascists and imperialists. They're literally ready to tear each other to pieces.
To hell with everything. Oh, crush everyone. Brat, after us, Ukraine should be left to a scorched earth. In other words, they don't even realize that basically, well, the Comrade Major can at any moment easily open a criminal case against them under certain articles and pack them away like sardines in a barrel.
The entire steamroller of Russian propaganda has turned against its own protégés. Naturally, no one is going to ask the Z supporters for their opinion. Most likely, the most zealous fighters will be sent on a meat assault and forgotten, while the end of the war will be presented to the public as the greatest victory in history. No matter what concessions the Kremlin makes, television will turn it into a triumph.
Of course, it won't lose the war with Ukraine. It won't lose. It might end at some stage there, not entirely the way we would like. And that's why we don't state our final objectives, because when we get there, we'll say, this is as far as we intended to go. We never wanted to go any further. This is where we plan to go.
All objectives of the special military operation will be achieved. Demilitarization was a success because Ukrainians destroyed their own drones, while Russians destroyed oil refineries. Donetsk region wasn't captured because it was never planned. Anyone who remembers it was planned. Those are foreign agents and reptilians.
This should, be a separate paragraph in a future, so to speak, manual on mental disorders in the era of the special military operation. My granddaughter, this is literally what they say now, my granddaughter will curse Putin's grandchildren because he betrayed the country at the negotiations. Honestly, I'd like to talk to many people. In the language of Joseph Vissarionovich, that's the truth.
The general biomass of Russians will accept any decision the Kremlin makes. They'll celebrate the end of the special military operation just as enthusiastically as they celebrated its beginning. How wonderful that wise Putin stopped the bloodshed that some scoundrel once started. Everyone will pretend they don't remember who that villain was.
Wait, who did it?
Yes.
Ukrainians are no longer considered enemies. They're not fascists or Nazis at all.
And when the residents of Kursk, who had been taken by Ukrainian soldiers from the occupied territories to Sumy, and then from Sumy were brought to Russia via Belarus, were returned, they told various stories. They spoke about how Ukrainian servicemen brought them their own food and shared their last rations with them. We must not lose our humanity and see them only as an evil empire.
After 20 years of dehumanization, a hysterical process of rehumanization has begun. Now there is even a separate people and a state called Ukraine, and Lenin has nothing to do with it anymore.
In any case, we will have to work with Ukraine. It's a country that there's no getting around it. They are our neighbors, our blood brothers. These tales about how we've become enemies forever, those are just stories. We've been through everything. all kinds of wars, civil wars, invasions, schisms, times of turmoil. And yet we always came back together, and that's how it will be now as well.
Alongside the official Kremlin propaganda about peace, ordinary adherents of the Russian world are also shouting about it. Ukraine has knocked out all their teeth of greatness. There's no longer any talk about the goals of the special military operation. The Z community, war correspondents, and soldiers are demanding an immediate end to the war without any additional conditions.
How much longer are we going to send our guys to die in these pointless attacks? For a couple dozen huts in Terni, we've already lost I don't even know how many hundreds of soldiers. I just don't understand when finally all of this will end. Does our command in Moscow really like this?
They no longer care whether peace with Ukraine will be favorable or not, whether the corridor to Crimea will remain, or even Crimea itself. The main thing is to end it before all Russians are gone.
Enough with the fighting already. We need to stop this fratricidal slaughter. We need to stop it. There's no point at all.
This is what's being said in the press, in the media, sometimes even in the Duma, that we should stop at what we've achieved. And the president seemed to speak in that vein as well. So what now? People are starting to bristle inside, right? Right. They start thinking the same way. Well, how many more guys are going to die? We don't need this anymore.
As a result, by the end of the third year of the war, Russian society and its leadership came to realize that all this horror was completely pointless. Russia is practically in the same place it was at the start of the full-scale invasion. Only what Ukraine is now, in the Kursk region. The only difference is that now Ukrainian drones are pounding the entire European part of Russia. Only 1 million Russians were killed and maimed. The only difference is that the economy has been destroyed and there is complete dependence on China. Putin wanted to show Ukrainians decommunization, but instead carried out a true derussification.
And our army is exhausted. It's very tired. But we don't understand what our country is fighting for. We don't understand these goals.
Putin might now even make the biggest concessions just to stop this suicidal special operation. But he won't do it to bring about peace. He just needs a pause for a new war. And as soon as a truce is reached, the propaganda will once again start shouting that Ukrainians don't exist and that the original lands must be reclaimed. The serfs will once again be pumped full of hatred, which will now be compounded by a thirst for revenge over the de facto lost special military operation. Moscow is already carrying out insane military propaganda among the youth and children, preparing those who will be sent into the meat grinder assaults in the next war.
If these agreements are reached, we still won't be able to consider them our absolute victory, because these will be agreements that, to some extent, will indeed preserve what is loosely called the sovereignty of Ukraine. An agreement of this kind will not eliminate the problem, but will instead freeze the conflict, which, without a doubt, will flare up again after some time.
There should be no illusions about Russia's peaceful intentions. As long as a Nazi regime remains in power there, the world must be prepared for anything.
And in the future, we will apparently have to carry out at least one more operation. And how far off that future will be, that does not resolve the issue. Any agreements, these are not a complete, final, and unconditional solution to the problem.
Although there is hope that this regime will not survive into peacetime. Millions of thugs will return home from the front, and they are unlikely to want to work as loaders for 10,000 worthless rubles. That's when all these imperialists, Z-patriots, Black Hundreds, and Orthodox Bolsheviks will show them who they can take out all their discontent on.
Or, so to speak, the system will have to be left untouched, and a freeze will have to be accepted on American terms, my friends. And for that, and this could lead to very, very serious domestic political problems, as you understand, I must say, because people returning from the war will ask, what was all this for? What was the point of all these, well, rivers of blood, rivers of the maimed?
On the evening of February 12th, a phone conversation took place between US President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. According to the President of Ukraine, it was a good and detailed dialogue.
It was a lengthy conversation. We discussed many nuances, diplomatic, military, and economic. And President Trump informed me about what Putin had told him. We believe that America's strength is enough, together with us and all our partners, to pressure Russia and Putin towards peace. To the thousands of Russia and Putin, to the mayor,
US President Donald Trump presented his version of the conversation with his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky.
I just spoke with President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. The conversation went very well. He, like President Putin, wants peace.
According to Trump, he discussed various topics related to the war with Zelensky, but mainly the upcoming Friday meeting between the Ukrainian and American delegations at the Munich Security Conference.
I hope that the results of this meeting will be positive. It is time to stop this senseless war, which has brought about massive and absolutely unnecessary death and destruction. May God bless the peoples of Russia and Ukraine.
The US president also held a phone conversation with the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. Trump described the conversation as lengthy and very productive, and stated that they agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's countries, and that negotiations would begin immediately.
We discussed Ukraine, the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, the strength of the dollar, and other topics.
Trump also stated that during the conversation with Putin, they agreed that they want to stop the millions of deaths occurring in the war between Russia and Ukraine. The Kremlin reported that Putin and Trump spoke for almost an hour and a half. The dictator's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, said that the topic of resolving the war against Ukraine was discussed.
President Trump expressed support for the prompt cessation of hostilities and for resolving the issue by peaceful means. President Putin, for his part, mentioned the need to eliminate the root causes of the conflict and agreed with Trump that a long-term settlement could be achieved through peaceful negotiations.
Peskov also reported that Putin invited Trump to Moscow.
And he expressed his willingness to receive American officials in Russia on those areas of work that are of mutual interest, including, of course, the issue of the Ukrainian settlement.
Meanwhile, during a conversation with journalists at the White House, Trump stated that he might possibly meet with the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin in Saudi Arabia. Speaking about removing the issue of Ukraine's NATO membership from the agenda, the American president stated that he is not opposed. The head of the White House also said that the US will continue to provide assistance to Ukraine, but Washington wants this assistance to be safe. The American leader did not give a clear answer regarding Ukraine's role in the negotiations to end the war that Russia is waging against our country.
That's an interesting question. I think they will have to make peace. People are being killed. This is a bad war, and I think they will have to make peace. That's what I think.
He also stated that a ceasefire in Ukraine could happen in the not-too-distant future, and he added that at some point elections must be held in Ukraine. At the same time, Trump allowed for the possibility that Ukraine might be able to regain some of the territories seized by Russia. However, the head of the White House considers a return to the 2014 borders unlikely. Donald Trump also asked the US Secretary of State, the CIA Director, the National Security Advisor, the ambassador, and the special envoy to lead negotiations regarding the resolution of Russia's war against Ukraine.
I would like to remind you that this video is created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolized or exaggerated form to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. Our goal is not to mislead, but to highlight humor. Please take it with a smile.